everybody? Is Mike's on? It's nice to see some familiar faces as well as some unfamiliar faces. This is the final meeting, unless it's necessary to go on to a backup date in a couple of days. But we expect that this will be the final meeting of the Westchester County Rent Guidelines Board. We're here to talk about and listen to presentations from the owner members of the board and the tenant members of the board on possible rent increases for leases that come out. I always did this wrong. For October 1st, 2016, is that correct? So we have both 1 year and 2 year lease renewals that may be coming up. Let me introduce the members of the board first. To my right, at the end, is Reverend Imogene Lofton-Woods, tenant member, Valine Aqua, public member, Elsa Rubin, public member, Michael Rosenblatt, public member, Eddie Mae Barnes, public member, Ken Finger, owner member, Elliot Cherson, owner member, and deputy counsel, and our counsel, Chuck Lesnick. Howard Brescian is our intrepid, I think a word I've used before, court reporter. Did you have any remarks you wanted to make, Chuck?
No, just
okay.
do the minutes.
Yes, we were just given the minutes of our last, this is a public meeting on June 8th. Did the board members have a chance to read them? They're quite brief. I wasn't present, so I'm going to abstain, but we have a motion to approve the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes
Approve.
from the last minute.
Moved by Eddie Mae Barnes, second by Elliot Cherson. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Say aye. Any opposed? Okay, I leave one abstention.
Approved 7.
Approved 7-0. Okay, this is, I'm just going to briefly sort of go over the agenda for this evening. This is what we plan to do. I'm also going to sit down. I was just told I have to stand for the whole meeting, but I don't think so. We are going to ask for presentations by the owner members and tenant member. I don't know if they arranged beforehand who's going to go first. Did you do that?
No, flip a coin.
Anybody? Chuck, how about flipping a coin for us? We usually do this in advance, but there really wasn't time. All right, I was just, Emma, do you want to go first? And
no, but I think Chuck should use his point because Elliot's not the
It's still good.
It is. Okay.
yeah.
But you get to
Well, there was just an offer, Emma, that if
Let Emma call it.
Emma, you get to call it.
okay.
Tails it is. Tails it is.
Tails, okay. So, Emma, you going to go first or second?
Do you, gentlemen?
Whatever you want, Emma.
I will yield the floor to you because I'd like to have the last word.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me say that we may or may not have rebuttals depending on whether the parties wish to make rebuttals. If they do, whoever goes first now will go last for the rebuttals. But they may elect not to do that. The presentations may be up to 20 minutes each. Looks like we have some negotiations here. All right, just give me one more minute, Ken. And after the presentations, I want to take a 5-minute recess, just to catch our breath. And at which point we will ask if there are rebuttals. If so, they can be up to 10 minutes each. If not, we won't have them, and we will proceed to motions on the guidelines and discussion on the motions, and then the vote. So without further ado, Mr. Finger.
Actually, let me give the recorder a copy of this. I won't stick to exactly close. Good evening, my fellow members of the Rent Guidelines Board. Most of you have heard some of this presentation before, but I thought this year I would take a somewhat different tack after reviewing some fundamentals. As a board, we are a product of the law that defines our authority and the parameters with which we're supposed to operate. While the tenants, of course, would like to lock in rents forever at their present amounts, the law does not provide that. The landlords are not taking an extreme position in an open market. They will be asking for a modest rent increase that will allow them to not only keep up with costs and make up for past failures to do so, but to make a reasonable return on their investment. Otherwise, of course, why invest in real estate? The statute says that in order to establish guidelines as a board, we shall, and that word is mandatory, it means must, consider among the following things: the economic condition of the residential real estate industry in the affected area, real estate taxes and sewer and water rates, and we've heard testimony about that, gross operating maintenance costs, costs and availability of financing, overall supply of housing accommodation and vacancy rates, and relevant data from the current and projected, and I underline projected, cost of living, including this year, the increased cost of fuel, among other things, and the fact that in the last month or two, the cost of living has increased more than it has in the last year, and such other data as may be made available to it. And what that means is data. We look at the data, not necessarily the anecdotal stories, which have some significance, but real data. First, I must repeat that the economic and social ills, lack of adequate income, and the failure of our government representatives to provide adequate subsidies is not the landlord's fault or the landlord's problem. It is the government's fault and the government's issue, and we cannot continue to expect landlords to subsidize politicians' failure to set aside money for housing or work to assure proper housing. We have street and tree programs that not even all our cities take full advantage of. And I thought it was interesting from the Mount Vernon chairperson of their city council that even they, I believe, would not go to the limit on the monies that are available, if I'm not correct. Why doesn't our government act? The cities can allow a tenant to earn up to $50,000 and still get screen and tree, I believe. But cities such as Mount Vernon, for one, I thought, he said, has a $40,000 threshold. New Rochelle, I believe, and Mr. Leslie can correct me if I'm wrong, a little over $20,000. Yonkers, I think, has finally gone up this year, and White Plains was at least $18,500, unless that's gone up also. Why not go up to the $50,000? Why don't the politicians, who are quick enough to criticize the landlords, assist in helping the people who can't afford their apartments? And these are the cities where the majority of our ETPA tenants live. This year, I thought it was interesting that we had virtually no tenants testify, except for their representatives, but had numerous individual landlords testify. In fact, one tenant representative testified 3 times, once at each hearing, about what she said were the appalling conditions in her building in Mount Vernon. This, of course, was the mirror image of her testimony last year. However, we did learn that, number one, virtually no tenants complained about conditions in their building, which I think is a product of the fact that the money allocated in your surveys for maintenance and repairs went up substantially this year. I think that with over 25,000 households and probably over 50,000 citizens residing there, we have less than a half a dozen registering any real complaints about building conditions. And this is because this board, I think, in its conscientious work in doing its job for the last few years, since 2010 and 2011, when there was that disastrous 0-0 guideline, didn't again have such a 0-0 guideline. And the impact of that showed up, the 0-0 guideline, in 2013 and 2014, when repairs and maintenance went down. This year, when we then got to the point of having reasonable increases in 11, 12, and 12 and 13, we ended up with an increase in repairs and maintenance from 5.8% to 9.9%. And this is why we had virtually no one complaining about repairs and maintenance this year. If you look at the year prior, when the 0-0 first kicked in, the amount of repairs and maintenance only increased 2.8%. The conclusion is clear. If we want the landlords to provide properly maintained and adequately repaired buildings, we have to give them reasonable increases, as you have for the last couple of years, and as those increases kicked in, repairs went up. Now, we should really look also at the cost in the chart and see that the overall expenses that went down there last year only did so because of one particular item, the cost of fuel. The landlords, of course, still received an increase last year, and were keeping their buildings up. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that it was the fuel, which went down 30% in Westchester, 40% in New York, and has now been increased by almost 30%. Now that's this year. And remember that you are not precluded from considering what happened this year, because it says that we are to consider such other data that is available and items that are also make a part of the anticipated economic situation of the industry. And if we exclude the fuel expenses this year, all the other expenses went up 4.2%. So we can see that the actual impact of the lowering of fuel last year affected it into the sense of a -5% of the increase in expenses. And that fuel cost has gone up again, as we heard in the unrebutted testimony from the representative that talked about the cost of fuel. Going now to the cost to income chart, which went down slightly from last year, this is about the same level as 2009, just before the 0-0 guideline. And this is the chart that it includes mortgage amortization, establishment of reserves for capital improvements, major capital improvements that do not get MCIs, and those are probably 50% of all the major capital improvements. And yes, that horrible word, profit. Remember, for many of these landlords, the profit is because they self-manage. And even the large landlords who don't self-manage have people working for them that provide jobs for many of our citizens. For 13 years, from the early 2000s, 90s, and 2000s, the cost to income ratio was substantially lower than it is right now. And we had a greater one even in 2006. We had 62.91% cost to income ratio. And in those years, the increases were 3.75 and 5 and 4 3/4 and 6.5. Even though the cost to income ratio was even lower than it is this year, which means that there was more cash available for the major capital improvements, for repairs, and for the cost of mortgage amortization reserves and that type of thing. Last year, we heard that landlords cannot provide what they consider adequate maintenance and repairs, and the survey showed us to be so over the last years prior to that. Landlords, we've also heard that landlords are selling their buildings, and tenants are unhappy with new landlords who, according to them, are not providing sufficient services. Again, last year we heard as a result of the 0-0. But it's interesting to note that we didn't hear that this year. Now, over 60% of the tenants take 2-year leases. And those leases that took effect at the time of the 0-0 had the impact between 2001 and 2004, thus denying the landlord the increases they needed to keep up with inflation and cost of living. We're still catching up, and we hope that we won't have to continue catching up and that there'll be a reasonable guideline this year. We think that the 1 1/4 and 2 1/4 increase the following year, a couple of years ago, 1 1/2, 2 1/2, 1.75, and 2.75, were not sufficient to cover the landlord's costs over the years. Over the years, again, looking at the figures since 2000, excluding last year where the increase was statistically almost the same, the average one-year increase in Westchester was approximately 2.6%. There was a greater differential for the 2-year increase, 3.7%. And since most tenants take a 2-year lease, 3.7% over 2 years is really devastating, because that kind of increase in terms of the cost of living, increased expenses, is hardly enough to keep up. I think it's important that we understand that we are talking about the cumulative effect over the years in Westchester County. Landlords just can't survive with another 0 increase that we had 5 years ago and minimal increases after that. You can't keep up with expenses, you can't keep up with the cost of living, you can't keep up with having to do repairs and maintenance. As to the economic condition of the residential real estate industry, I refer you to the fact that we have lost hundreds and thousands of units in the years. This is because of the rent guidelines, minimal opportunity to make a reasonable living owning real estate. A guideline increase that is just too low will drive more landlords out of the industry. ETPA's artificial limitation on rents is a drag on the maintenance of existing housing and the ability of people to buy buildings and operate them at a reasonable profit. Moreover, the condition of housing will deteriorate without reasonable rent adjustments to allow a landlord to keep pace. If we want people to invest in and improve affordable housing, we have to allow them to not only stay even, but to make a reasonable profit. As we've heard from multiple small landlords who either have family-owned or small building investments. Is it un-American to earn a profit on your investment? If you can get a guaranteed return in the stock market or bonds, why not invest? Why invest in real property? You have a risk, and you have to have some ability to get a profit. And the failure to guarantee a reasonable profit will drive out responsible landlords and leave us with people cutting corners to just stay even. This is what happened in the past and does not work to anybody's benefit. The cost of rent control are not only borne by the landlords, but the loss of income results in reduction in assessments and less money to the municipalities and subsidies by single-family owners. So we have more certiorari's when you have less profits. Moreover, as is recognized by even the tenants, it leads to housing shortages. We only have to look at other cities where there are no controls, such as Chicago, Philadelphia, San Diego, Seattle, where there are no controls. Vacancy rates are over 7%. But in Westchester, that's under 5%. Cities such as Boston and Cambridge have abolished rent control, and not only did everyone survive, but there are more apartments available and more available housing for new families. Over the years, while long-term tenants continue to stay in their apartments, reducing the availability of housing, new tenants have to look for either luxury housing or housing with rental much higher than necessary. This skewing of the market can be avoided by at least providing a low rent guideline increase in addition to the regular percentage increase. As we have heard, there are always some apartments at the higher end of the scale in the higher teens that are paying preferential rents since the market dictates what has to be collected. The only fair thing is for both the landlords and tenants to equalize the rents being collected so that the market takes over and there will be a reasonable availability of apartments for our young families and people being encouraged to invest in residential housing. We must encourage and not discourage investments. We cannot do that at a 0 increase or even a 1 or 2% increase. Expenses increase exponentially and income barely increases. And as far as vacancies are concerned, the chart that was presented by the former member is skewed because it doesn't talk about preferential rents. It only talks about vacancies with the legal regulated rents that are substantially higher than the actual rents being collected. And if you look at those charts as to vacancies, approximately 25% of the units have under a 5% increase. And if you add the decreases and those under 5%, you see that is so. Approximately 90% of the units have less than a 30% increase. Taxes, of course, are still going up, an increase of 2.7%. Fuel, while going down last year, went right back up. As I said, we heard it's up 30% in the last 5 months. Repairs are up almost 100%, but this is what we want. Vacancies are a red herring, and it's something that is statutory and is not our obligation. The numbers that were given to this board were inflated as speculative. Last year, I pointed out an article which set forth the negative impacts of rent control, and I'd like to do it quickly as I'm starting to finish up. The rent controls inhibit new construction, lead to the deterioration of existing housing, lead to reduced property tax revenues for the communities, have substantial administrative costs. And you've heard about from some of our members about the fact that a new lease, it used to be 1 page to sign a lease with a tenant, and now it's a packet. It's 12 pages every time extra that you have to sign a lease or a lease renewal. Reduced consumer mobility and lack of housing for young families. Higher entry costs for the housing. And landlords are unfairly burdened, and I ask that the members and the public members of this board not burden them further. Thus, the landlords are caught in an ever-swirling cauldron of increasing expenses, including taxes, repairs, maintenance, utilities, and you remember you heard about water, particularly in places like Yonkers, while the income is not increasing at as fast a pace. And remember, the increase in expenses, except for oil, was over 4%. The result is less cash flow, less income, less profit, less money for improvement in the upgrades of the buildings, and less money to keep the properties from leaving the housing market. Every year, as in the past, we've heard why they're still landlords. Well, because people still feel it's an honorable profession to provide housing. The minimum increase that we think that this board should grant the landlords here is 3.75% for 1 year and 5.75% for 2 years, with a low rent increase of $50 for all apartments rented under $1,000, which is approximately the average expense per apartment. There has to be an incentive for mobility in apartments, and a low rent increase will just do just that. Thank you for your patience in listening to me, and I hope you will consider what I have with serious attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Walton Woods. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Finger. Good evening, everyone in the audience. Good evening to our board members and our chairperson. I'm going to sound like a familiar person. Let me say this, or let me begin by saying, my way of giving back is my service to the rent-stabilized tenants in the communities of Westchester County as their tenant representative. An American icon once said that service to others is the rent we pay on earth. It's a service. I'm well aware that some are very dissatisfied with me as a tenant representative. Trust me, as God gives me continued life, my term will end 2011, December. And for those who are vying for this seat, remember, this seat is a service. One individual cannot take sole credit for the guidelines passed by this board over the years. Collectively, whether the tenants or the owner reps vote on the guidelines, we are a board. And I respect the experience, the expertise, and the talent that each one of particularly our public members bring to the board. I thank you, public members. And I know you do not hear that enough, but I thank you on behalf of all of the people that I represent, that either want me to or not. And I don't gain one thing by antagonizing any public member, and particularly you, Mr. Rosenblatt. I don't gain anything by that. And neither does anyone else, particularly the tenants. My grandparents were farmers. I was raised on a 100-acre farm, and we had a mule. And my grandparents used to say, when the mule is dead, get off. We have to realize when to get off the dead mule. Also, on behalf of the people that I represent on the board, it is my prayer that our public members, who are a deciding factor in the quality of lives for over 25,000 households in Westchester County. I have a list, and I asked our council to provide a listing of all the ETPA units by municipalities. I was surprised that Greenberg had ETPAs. I was surprised that a number of different municipalities had the number of ETPA units that they do. So what we do on this board, whether we vote for it or not, Mr. Kent, Mr. Finger, and Mr. Cheerson, we affect people's lives. I can't live with knowing that I was responsible indirectly for someone becoming homeless. I appeal to you all tonight. And this may or may not be the last time that you hear me. You got one more year with me now. But I appeal to you. We've had data provided for us by some of the most capable analysts from DHCR. I want you all to please remember the data. We've had the presentations. We've had a presentation, a testimony from our former tenant representative. We had the few tenants that came out who thought it wasn't robbery to come out and speak for themselves. My grandparents also said to me that a closed mouth don't get fed. But I guess I'm that mouthpiece tonight. We had our testimony from the one and only public elected official, Assembly Member Shelley Mayer. And we all have a copy of that. There's no point in me reinventing the wheel. Like I said, when a horse is dead, get off. So there's no point in me going over everything that you had. I remember one year when I was on the board as the only tenant rep, someone said, oh, this is a lot to read. I felt bad because I tried to provide as little data or research the material that I could so that it would not encumber those that were going to make this decision. It is my responsibility, though, to speak on behalf of the tenants. Since I'm a resident of Yonkers, and Yonkers has over half of the rent-stabilized units in the county, 16,576 units. The city carries that burden for the people. I asked Cluster Community Services and their Housing Resource Center to share with the board some of the data for year-end 2015. And I did attach the email that I received from Ms. Frida Macon, the Deputy Executive Director. And it said, households assisted through Cluster Housing Resource Center, DSS work in 2015. Through its Westchester County Department of Social Service contract. In 2015, the Cluster Housing Resource Center provided services for 416 household cases, comprised of 312 families and 104 single individuals. Of those numbers, 213 cases were over 50, which was over 50%, had to do with rent arrears, rent disputes, and high rent burdens. And some of us are very familiar with Cluster. 217 cases, another over 50%, involved providing relocation or rehousing assistance. 120 cases, 29%, included assisting tenants with rent subsidy applications. You hear so much about Section 8. It's not a given. All of these cases, Ms. Macon said, involve providing benefits, advocacy, and help to address clients' economic need and the lack of affordable housing. I'm still using Yonkers as an example. The conditions of underemployment, unemployment, and poverty haven't changed significantly, particularly in the zip codes of 10705 and 10701. That's South Yonkers is 10705, Southwest, not East Yonkers particularly, but Southwest, and 10701 Northwest Yonkers. The recipients of Social Security benefits did not see a COLA increase. Someone said, well, that's the government's fault. Well, you know what? Seems like the government got a whole lot of faults going on. But we, the people, make up the government. I cannot dictate to our government that I need a cost of living increase. Those that are elected to those positions in Washington are the ones that set these things in place. But we should not be penalized because we didn't get a cost of living increase. The working class is still struggling with paying rent. The food pantries, as you've heard my senior pastor say, the food pantries are becoming the source of groceries for many. And I witness that every Thursday. Every Thursday. And we feed families, not the homeless. We feed families who make a decision, am I going to pay my rent or am I going to feed my family? And not everybody gets snapped either. The owners testified about the age of their buildings. 60 years old, 70-year-old, 80-year-old buildings. Don't that mean that the pipes are old too? Can't have an old building if you don't have old pipes. Those pipes, and we've heard a lot about water, but those pipes provide the drinking water, the cooking water, the bathing water. And all of us remember Flint, Michigan. I've seen water coming out of pipes that was so clouded in Yonkers that you couldn't see the back of your hand through the glass. Water, we need it. We can't live without it. We need safe water. In fact sheet number 3 from the division, it says that services owners are required to provide. An owner must provide and maintain services and equipment furnished or required. There's rent control, but we're rent stabilized regulations. Required are essential services, which include repairs, heat, and cold water. That's an essential service. It's required. In closing, it is my humble prayer that our public members recall our board meeting of June the 8th. Numbers don't lie. Figures don't lie. And we are all of intelligence, and it is a requirement that we have a background in some form of finance. We know those figures. We saw them. We discussed them. There was a time years ago when we didn't have all that we have now, the presentations, the this and the that. We discussed these figures in a public forum. But we don't do that now. We do it behind closed doors. But anyone that wants a copy of that data can get it from DHCR. So it's my prayer that y'all remember that meeting. And in closing, contrary to the belief of some, in 41 years of paying rent, I've never experienced or benefited from a zero increase. And I want that to be on record, because I've been accused that I won't ask for a zero unless I'm going to benefit. That's an insult to me as a human being. But tonight, I appeal to this board for that increase I've never seen. And the reason why, because again, figures don't lie. And we need to ease the burden of so many families that are struggling just to make ends meet. We're not living in a lap of luxury. There are some communities where people are living better than others, but where I live, Mount Vernon, parts of New Rochelle, those are the lower income people, and the majority of them live in rent stabilized apartments. I have heard our owners testify about their family businesses. God bless them. I know what a family business is. But our young people, unfortunately, do not even benefit from secession rights. You know why? Because we cannot stay in one place that long, because you got to keep moving. The rent goes up, people move. There are some, fortunately, that have been in their apartments long term, and some family member may benefit from secession rights, but not too many. So what about our young families? What do we do for them? I heard someone on a talk show recently called in and asked that same question. What about the young people? Everyone isn't making six figures. Some family members that I know that we service are working 2 and 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their head. We can help their lives. We can help them tonight, members. I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything, and I am sure ain't kissing up to nobody. But I'm appealing to you as human beings. We got a job to do. And y'all have an awesome job to do. And I thank you.
We're going to take a 5-minute break. Everybody sit down. Thank you. I've just been advised that the owners and the tenant representative don't want to make any rebuttals. So without further ado, I think it's time to call for a motion. Does somebody have a motion? Ribbon, Lofton Woods. Excuse me, Chuck, you will be you'll call the roll and...
Sure.
Again, for the benefit of those people that I represent, I am going to ask this board for a 0 increase for 1 year and a 0 increase for 2 years.
Is there a second? Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Eddie Mae Barnes. Discussion?
Okay, the roll is
Hearing no discussion, we will have a vote.
Valine Aqua. No. Eddie Mae Barnes.
Yes.
Yes. Elliot Cherson.
No.
Ken Finger.
No.
Michael Rosenblatt.
No.
Elsa Rubin.
No.
Reverend Emma Jean Lofton Woods.
Yes.
And the chair doesn't vote unless there's a tie, so it's 5 to 2. No, 4 to,
No, 16.
Wait a minute.
Right.
Anybody out there counting?
5 to 2.
It's 6 to 2.
No, 5 to
The
2.
chair doesn't.
Oh, she didn't vote. Okay.
5 to 2.
5 to 2, which means
It doesn't pass.
what?
It doesn't pass.
Doesn't pass.
Right.
I have a motion.
Yes, Mr. Sherson.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion for a 3.75 increase for 1 year and 5.75 for 2 years.
I second.
Once again, the roll call, Valine Aqua. Different order? Different
No,
order.
go on, go.
Eddie Mae Barnes,
No.
Elliot Cherson,
Yes.
Ken Finger,
Yes.
Michael Rosenblatt,
No.
Elsa Rubin,
No.
Reverend Emma Jean Lofton Woods.
No.
Again, 2 to 5, with the chair not voting. Fails.
Hear another motion? Reverend Lofton Woods?
I'll make a motion.
Too late.
All right.
I make a motion that for a 1 year lease renewal, a 0 increase. For a 2 year lease renewal, a 0.50.
Okay, we're going to mix up the order this time. We're
I
going to.
second that.
Eddie Mae.
Seconded by Eddie Mae.
On the top, Reverend Emma Lofton Woods,
Yes.
Elsa Rubin,
Yes.
Michael Rosenblatt,
No.
Ken Finger,
No.
Elliot Cherson,
No.
Eddie Mae Barnes,
Yes.
Valine Aqua.
Yes.
And the chair is voting yes.
Hallelujah.
The motion passes. Wait a All right, don't run out. There's some confusion.
It's only a tie.
Only you make a break a tie.
So what was the count?
The count doesn't fit in it fails.
But if she voted, that's not.
Then Schwartz, we still doesn't vote. Has to be 5 for them. Has to be 5.
Are you, the chair can't vote? As far as I know, the chair can vote. All right, who's the specialist in Robert's rules here?
There you go.
We're gonna just take another 3-minute recess to see if we can straighten this out. Gentlemen in the back and ladies, want to take your seats? I'm so sorry for this delay. It's apparently such an unusual situation. It has, according to some authorities here, has never occurred before. And I'm going to ask Chuck Lesnick to take the mic and explain what's going on.
Anticipating that this might happen, I did look at the statute, and there is nothing in the statute that says the chair can't vote. However, it has been the tradition of this board that the chair hasn't voted, but it again is nothing in the statute. Now, Robert's rules is what usually dictates the operation of a meeting. Robert's rules actually says that a chair can vote, and a chair can vote in the case of a tie, but the chair can't double vote. In other words, the chair's vote couldn't make it 4-4, and then you then have the chair vote again. So with that logic, the chair can vote. Now, when we make a ruling like this, we are going to check this out tomorrow to make sure the ruling stands. It's sort of like when you play baseball and the umpire makes a decision on the field, it stands unless there's compelling evidence to turn it the other way around. Fortunately, we do have another meeting date, which is Wednesday at City Hall in White Plains. So I'm going to rule that the chair can vote, that the vote took place, and that will stand. If it turns out after deliberation tomorrow then that we have to meet again, we'll meet again. If it turns out that that ruling is correct, then we will not meet again on Wednesday.
And that means that the guidelines will pass.
The guidelines will pass.
The guideline, okay, the guideline of 0% for 1 year and 0.50% for 2 years, as of now, stands.
Do we have anything with the fuel?
We have, yes, I didn't forget that. We also need a motion
I have
about,
another motion on the low rent guideline.
oh, okay, Mr. Finger.
I would move that we establish a low rent guideline of $50 a month for all apartments renting for less than $1,000.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Finger, seconded by Mr. Cherson. Any discussion? You want to repeat the motion just to make sure everybody heard it and understands it?
The motion is that for all apartments renting for under $1,000 a month, there'd be a special guideline of $50 per unit per month.
Does everybody understand?
Of course.
Any discussion on this motion?
I just have one comment. Several years ago, Mr. Chair, I distinctly remember when this came up again, and you said, and I don't know if it was concrete as a board, but you said we would not be doing those, what do you call them, surcharges?
Well, people call it a low rent increase.
That's not low either.
$1,000 per month is the average, close to the average cost of expense per apartment under a stabilized apartment. If you divide the number of apartments by the total amount of expenses, it comes out to actually something in excess of $1,000 a month. So that evens out the rental a little bit.
Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Okay, I'm going to start from the bottom again. Reverend Emma Jean Lofton Woods,
No.
Elsa Rubin,
No.
Michael Rosenblatt,
No.
Ken Finger,
Yes.
Elliot Cherson,
Yes.
Eddie Mae Barnes,
No.
Lean Aqua.
I have another motion.
Motion fails.
I have another motion.
Motion by Mr. Tristan,
A low rent guideline of $40 for any apartment rented for $900 or less.
second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second low rent guideline of $40, say it again, for any apartment renting for 900 or less. Or up to 900. Well, is it up to 900 or there are two different motions?
900 or less.
900 or less. Discussion?
Discussion.
Comment. In our data, it showed the number of apartments that were renting for $900 or less. But keep in mind that anyone paying that amount of rent has been in that apartment for a number of years, and they're older, and they're on fixed incomes, and they do not qualify excuse me, I'm talking. They do not qualify necessarily for street.
I would like to comment about that. In my own personal experience doing this for many years, it's not necessarily the case because you have succession. So if an older parent moves out and they were paying, let's say, $850, then a young couple, the children, let's say, were making a lot more money than their elderly parent, they would pay the same thing. They would pay $850 if $850 was
But
there.
Mr. Chair,
And that is happening in a tremendous amount of situations.
well, it's not happening in my neighborhood, and also, if I may say this, the law says that in order to have those succession rights, you either have to be in the apartment with that individual for 1 year, disabled, or 2 years living in the same unit with that person.
Absolutely true.
So I don't understand when you say young families, and I'm not going to go back and forth. I'm not going back and
What
forth.
I'll be clear is people move in with an elderly parent, children, let's say, or grandchildren. This is what happens. They see that the grandparent is getting older, and they'll be moving to a retirement or whatever. And they do move in, and they stay there for 2 years. And when grandma moves out to wherever, Florida, then they take over and succeed. And their rent of the children or grandchildren is exactly the same as grandmother's.
Well, I had asked, and this is my last comment. I addressed that question to our deputy, and I admit I didn't send it, email everyone, but I did address to our council how many or how successful has the succession rights been in Westchester. And I understand, Mr. Lesnick, that you did not get back to me.
Right, we haven't, the question was posed, it was a research question, I sent it over to research, as to what percentage of succession rights worked and didn't work. Cases. And we haven't had an answer on that yet.
All right.
I addressed my case.
We're getting to a point where the parties
Like I said,
are repeating themselves. I think it's time to have a vote.
Yes.
Okay. Reverend Emma Jean Lofton Woods,
No.
Elsa Rubin,
No.
Michael Rosenblatt,
No.
Ken Finger,
Yes.
Elliot Cherson,
Yes?
Eddie Mae Barnes,
No.
Lean Aqua. No. It fails to.
I have another one. I move that we have a low rent guideline increase of $25 a month for all tenants paying, ETBA tenants paying $500 a month or less. $25.
Did everybody hear the motion? Do we need discussion? Oh, I'm sorry. There wasn't a second, now there's a second.
Yes.
Mr. Cherson. Want to call the roll?
Helene Aqua. Eddie Mae Barnes.
No.
Elliot Cherson.
Yes.
Ken Finger.
Yes.
Michael Rosenblatt. No. Elsa Rubin.
No.
Reverend Emily Jean Lofton Woods.
No.
Again, 2 to 5.
See you next year.
Wait, we need a motion on, for a guideline for those tenants who, for whom the owner is not supplying heat and hot water. Heat and or hot water. We have a formula that's been used in the past. Michael knows this stuff very well. It would be, it's 80% of the guideline that just passed, so it would be 0 for 1 year, obviously, and 0.4 for 2 years. Not 0.5. 0.5 is, yes, this is for those tenants where they pay for their own heat and or hot water. We'll hear a second. Michael,
Okay, second.
oh, sorry, moved by Michael Rosenblatt, seconded by Eddie Mae Barnes. Discussion? No discussion.
Okay, roll call.
Roll call.
Helene Aqua.
Yes.
Eddie Mae Barnes.
Yes.
Elliot Cherson.
No.
Ken Finger.
No.
No. Mike Rosenblatt. Yes. Elsa Rubin.
Yes.
And Emma.
Yes.
Ask the chair to hold 1 second.
Okay, just,
Linda?
this looks like an important call related to this discussion that we had earlier, so just bear with us a little longer. We'll take another couple of minute recess. Okay, we're back on the record and recognize Chuck Lesnick.
Okay, so I spoke to the General Counsel for HCR, Linda Manley, who basically upheld the decision on 2 grounds. One is that while you need a quorum of 5 to vote, you don't need 5 votes to pass, you just need a majority of those present once the quorum's been established. Therefore, a 4-3 majority would pass. And the fact that the chair voted is sort of not relevant, but there's nothing in our statute, there's nothing in that prevents the chair from voting. So on both grounds, the ruling is upheld.
Mr. Finger asked that we put his objection on the record. So it is now on the record. And also Mr. Cherson.
And you know that 4 is not.
So we don't need to have another meeting today.
4 is not majority.
What
So 4 to
I assume the objection is to the finding, but Mr. Cherson or Mr. Finger, would you care to explain what your objection is? I assumed you were objecting to the finding. Please explain. Mr. Finger, you want to explain your objection?
I agree with my compatriot, Mr. Cherson. We are putting a formal objection to the determination on the record and to your vote.
All right, I'll overrule it. Your objections are overruled.
overrule the objection, it's just a matter of record. You can't overrule. We didn't vote on it, so you can't overrule it.
Just kidding. I was kidding. All right. It's done. We have a guideline, and we'll see you in September. I have a motion to adjourn by Eddie May Barnes, seconded by Rosenblatt. All in favor? Voice vote.
Thank you, thank